Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So good to see everybody. We had a fantastic first day and looking forward to another engaging day of programming, including conversations on artificial intelligence, keys to building affordable housing. We have the latest on federal broadband funding coming to your communities and public safety. We'll wrap up at lunch with an inspiring session on how to bridge differences and bring people together. But first, we want to finish what we started yesterday. We have the conclusion of a series of conversations digging into the freedom agenda released by the New Deal and the New Democrat Coalition. Central, of course, to that agenda is protecting our democracy. We're proud of the role that New Deal Secretaries of State are playing to promote voting and run our elections smoothly. And we're thrilled to be joined by New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, along with Beth Huang, Program Officer of Civic Engagement and Democracy at Tides. Beth leads the Healthy Democracy Fund, a pooled fund that seeks to close racial voter turnout gaps and has granted over $17 million to over 100 organizations since 2020. As we welcome them up, we'll have them come up to the stage. I want to also recognize the Secretary as a winner of our Ideas Challenge that we talked about quite a bit yesterday for her leadership on the New Mexico Voting Rights Act and election infrastructure legislation. As you may have noticed, the many great New Deal submissions we received for the challenge really illustrate the kind of policies that support our freedom agenda. You can go to our website to check out all the submissions, which provide a roadmap to lower cost and expand opportunities for families, promote equity, and target underserved communities, make effective use of federal funds, and protect democracy. So before we get started with the panel, I do want to present, we have a video to show featuring our 4 winners, including the Secretary.
This year, for the 6th Biennial Ideas Challenge, over 50 New Deal leaders submitted policy ideas
that address the most pressing issues facing Americans today.
That's 78 proposals that are focused on demonstrating how government can work effectively to solve problems and deliver tangible results.
I'm proud to say that I'm an Ideas Challenge 2023 winner.
And that my idea, creating a diverse STEM workforce by leveraging federal CHIPS funding, is shaping a bright future in Oregon.
The New Mexico Voting Rights Act is shaping the future of New Mexico.
The Georgia Educational Opportunity Act will help shape the future of Georgia.
It is shaping the future of the city of Richmond. And I want to create ladders to opportunity, ladders to success for so many of our children. And the Richmond Pathways program is essentially a traditional promise scholarship on steroids.
It's about time that we caught up with our peers and actually provided a set of resources for every single child to ensure that their economic situation, their zip code does not predetermine their success.
It has been my work in the legislature to talk about closing the gap between talent and opportunity. And that's where it really hits home, because we have brilliant kids across this state that if they didn't have the opportunity, they won't go as far as they could. And I think for our national defense, our national security, for our leadership in STEM, that is essential.
We're already getting super positive feedback on the notice to all voters. Thank you so much for telling me where, when, and how I can cast my ballot. So even though there are always challenges with implementation, once we kind of get something launched and off the ground and working in real life, that is so rewarding.
New Deal leaders aren't the type of leaders that will take their ball and go home. We're trying to find success, and we recognize that the real victory in all this is by us doing the right thing by those who need us.
We want to make sure that people have the absolute best lives they can possibly have, and that is what government should be doing, investing in its people and delivering results.
Good morning, everyone. So wonderful to see you all this morning. My name is Beth Huang. I'm the program officer at the Tides Foundation, focused on civic engagement and democracy. I'm so excited for this conversation with Secretary Toulouse Oliver today, and I really want to invite everyone to think about what democracy means to you. To me, it goes beyond Election Day, it goes beyond voters, and it goes beyond the ballot box. To me, it's that everyday people have an everyday say in the decisions that impact their lives. And our North Star at the Tides Healthy Democracy Fund is that we have a multiracial democracy in which everyone feels included, everyone feels heard, that if you want to vote, you can vote. If you can vote, you do vote. And then finally, if you do vote, you and your communities are represented in the halls of power every day. And we see so many different types of barriers to that, whether it's the micro-targeted voter suppression laws, whether that shorten the windows for voting by mail, or moving of campus polling locations. These are the things that micro-target people who are already denied power. And we also see this in the constant vicious cycle of low participation, and if your community doesn't participate, your elected officials, whether or not they really mean to do it, pay a little bit less attention to you, which cause your community to feel unheard and underinvested. And this doesn't have to be this way. And so at the Healthy Democracy Fund at the Tides Foundation, we invest in the trusted messengers, the community-based organizations that are curbing that cycle and are increasing voter participation in their communities year after year, week after week. And the Healthy Democracy Fund in the year 2023, a so-called off year, although I'm sure many of you had election days just last week and doesn't feel like an off year to you all. We've granted $17 million this year to community-based organizations and in 11 states that have faced historic voter suppression and also have increasingly diversifying communities. And so I'm so excited to learn more about our Secretary of State from New Mexico. Yes, I think you all can give another set of shout outs. Who has so much expertise in administering elections for the past 16 years.
Almost 17.
Almost 17 years. I can't even imagine how many cycles, special elections, and more.
Therapist bills.
And so I'm excited to learn how first, in your 16, almost 17 years of administering elections, I'm so curious how voting has changed for everyday people and what that's meant for you and your office.
Sure. Well, first of all, good morning. Happy to finally be here at the conference. I was telling Debbie that the New Mexico legislature is way less organized than the New Deal, because this conference was planned out way before they told me I had to come to a budget hearing, a pre-session budget hearing with our interim legislative finance committee the other day. So I'm late, but I'm here, better late than never. Thank you all for having me, and I really am happy we get to have this conversation. I think as New Deal leaders, it goes without saying that the future of our democracy, I know, is on all of our minds, and what's going to happen next year is on all of our minds. A lot of things have changed. One thing that's really changed, as an election administrator, so I was a local election administrator for 10 years in Bernalillo County, which is the Albuquerque metropolitan area of New Mexico, so the biggest jurisdiction. So I'm used to, having Democrats and Republicans at the voting machine warehouse where we're processing vote-by-mail ballots and, sort of the contentious aspects of that process and sort of looking things over and paying very close attention, having maybe disagreements, needing to mediate those. Needless to say, since 2020, it has gone up a notch. Obviously the rancor, the polarization, just, the vitriol. people have become armchair experts on election administration. And it's funny because I always used to say, and I still believe this, that it's wonderful when people learn the mechanics of election administration. For those of you who aren't election administrators, you've probably observed, aspects of the process, and many of those aspects of the process are not very sexy. They're like watching paint dry. That is for a reason. It's good, but you can really get into the weeds, and it's very complex. Those of you who are legislators know, because you make the laws, they're very complex laws. And so with that said, having more interest in the election process itself is wonderful. I love it. But as we know, so much of it is based on mis and disinformation now. That has really originated from ultimately just being very unhappy with a particular election outcome. And we all know which one we're talking about. And it's interesting how the mis and disinformation and the myths have even evolved since 2020. Whether it be Venezuela controlling Dominion voting machines, now in my state, many of you saw last summer, they decided, well, we're just not going to certify the election based on some algorithm that some engineer who has now decided they're an election expert put together. So those, I think, those are some of the biggest challenges from an election perspective, and then administration perspective. Briefly, in terms of voting, in general, more people are voting early, more people are voting by mail, fewer people are identifying with political parties. In my state, we just saw some new numbers that in our 5 biggest counties, the number of independent voters or declined to state voters has increased drastically in the last several election cycles. And so we as election administrators have to respond to that and really bring elections to where folks are. We're used to having lots of options now for everything that we do. So we need to make sure that we provide those options for voting as well, and that has been the biggest change.
Absolutely. And so I'm sure that so many of you have seen the ways that people campaign differently because of vote by mail, the way that people have higher expectations for what type of civic access that they have. And of course, that access and equity is never free, and it's usually not cheap. And I heard that you were just coming from a budget hearing. So for all of the local and state level elected officials here, who I'm sure have a million different budget considerations, I'm curious what you think are the most important things that local and state level elected officials should think about when forming their budgets.
Sure, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with the legislators in this room, but it was funny. I was sort of scheduled towards the end of the day on Wednesday, which is of course why I couldn't get here, because you can't fly anywhere from New Mexico after about 2 p.m. You're just you're stuck. But, by the time I got to give my presentation, they said, Madam Secretary, it's been late, it's been a long day, keep your presentation brief. I said, okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll keep it brief about literally the process that makes sure we're all here doing this job. I was being a little sarcastic. First of all, I think it's important for folks to understand that elections are getting more expensive, just like everything else. We can't go to the grocery store anymore without spending like $100, right? Just on a few things. Elections are the same. We've had to literally double the cost of what we pay our poll workers just to make sure that we can recruit and retain those folks moving forward. If we want a citizen-run democracy in this country, and I think we all do, we have to compensate them, for their time. And yes, it's a volunteer job, it's a civic duty, but many of them have to take time off work or from other obligations. So that that's an increased cost. Consumables, paper, for those of you who are anywhere even tangential to the election world, the cost of envelopes and paper have gone up because of supply chain issues. And then, of course, the technology. We continue to modernize the process to make it easier and more accessible for voters, and that costs money too. So lastly, cybersecurity and physical security of our polling locations have become emerging, really important priorities for election administrators, and that costs money too.
For sure, and I really appreciate what you lifted up with the poll workers. In many places, the Voting Rights Act mandates that because of low literacy rates among usually language minority populations, that we have to provide every material in another language, right? And recruiting poll workers in general has been tough given the polarized political climate. And then I imagine that, and then I know in my old city of Boston, the recruitment of bilingual poll workers became increasingly difficult. Are there any other types of major challenges that this current political climate and economic climate pose to recruiting poll workers that you're facing in 2024?
Well, yeah, I mean, folks who have done this work for years, I think there's two things, or even recruiting new folks. For the folks who've done this work for years, many of them are concerned about their safety. And the one thing, I'm going to just cross everything, light a candle, knock on wood. Hopefully we won't also be running an election during a pandemic next year, which was a particular challenge of 2020, and in 2022 to a certain degree. So a lot of folks who are older or immunocompromised, the idea of being in a polling place with all of these people coming in and out, and whether or not they wore their mask and whether or not they socially distanced, that was a huge issue for a lot of folks. And in that case, many people just decided, well, maybe this isn't for me anymore. Maybe I won't serve as a poll official anymore. So we're now having to look at recruiting new folks in many parts of my state, and I'm sure you all have parts of your states that are just like this. You have a county, a local jurisdiction where you have plenty of Republicans, Democrats, right? And you have like a handful of the other party, and we want to make sure we have these bipartisan groups. So that's become really hard in some places because, so it's funny. Perfect example. I ran for re-election last year. I did a fundraiser in Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, supposedly where the aliens crashed. It's Chavez County, New Mexico, very heavily Republican part of the state. And we did this Democratic fundraiser for myself and another candidate. And it was funny because they were all going around like, I didn't know you were a Democrat. I didn't know you were. It was like this coming out party for the Democrats in Roswell, right? And so that's hard too, right? Like, I don't want to necessarily be out in my community as a member of the opposite party. That's not in power here. So we just, and then safety, making sure that, people feel like that they're going to be okay, if they're exposed at a polling place. So this year we increased penalties for harassment and threats of violence against election officials in our state. And many other states have done that as well.
Are there any things, speaking of safety, so much of it is in the preparation leading up to Election Day, and then so much of it is preparing for so many different types of scenarios after Election Day also. Could you share more about what, in addition to increasing the penalties, what your preparation looks like, whether it's with your fellow elected officials, law enforcement? Is there anything that what are the main scenarios that you're planning for?
Well, I think when it comes to elections, you have to kind of expect anything to happen and plan for as much as you can potentially envision. And so we're doing more now with our county clerks, and then that is trickling down to our poll officials in terms of situational awareness, in terms of, quite frankly, active shooter training, in terms of, okay, what is the process if there's a disturbance or something's going on? You as a poll official official feel threatened or harassed, or your voters feel threatened or harassed, we now stand up a room in the lead up to election, and by a room I mean a cyber room, where we have state and federal law enforcement, a lot of our county or sheriff organizations, local police, Homeland Security, our Air and Army National Guard, where we're all kind of monitoring what's going on throughout the state, and we're able to very quickly, rapidly respond and work with those local officials when and if, hopefully something doesn't, but if it does happen.
Mm-hmm. And I want to pick up on the thread that you were sharing earlier about mis and disinformation, which I think is the seed for and the cause of so much of what we're talking about. What do you think are some of the more effective strategies for combating mis and disinformation? You know, small question for a Friday morning.
Question. I would love to know the answer to that. One of the most effective things that we've seen is pre-bunking, and so many of us do so much more of that now. So for example, as we head into 2024, we know that the emergence of AI into the election space, we just know it's going to be a huge issue. We don't know how it's going to manifest yet. So we're all trying to become, AI experts, like we're cyber experts, and we're, national security experts and all these other things now. But in my state, we're going to launch a huge public awareness campaign about AI and sort of what it looks like, how it kind of can make its way into the public discourse. And, and as always, we're always talking about media and social media literacy. And, if it sounds too good to be true or too bad to be true, it's probably not true, and how to check sources and, metadata. God, we're going to get into so many things, but we're hopeful that the more we do this type of pre-bunking work, we minimize the effect of the mis and disinformation.
For sure. And when we try to spread these narratives about that give people the correct information, inoculate people against some of the mis and disinformation, we need a lot of different partners, whether they are, they're trusted neighborhood leaders, faith leaders, lots of other different types of trusted messengers. What are some effective ways for partnering with community-based organizations and generally the civil society apparatus?
Well, I think, first of all, as an election official, being open to that and really trying to make time and space for having those conversations. I will say in my state, my experience has been that those kinds of organizations, they want accurate information. They want to give out accurate information. And you're right, we can't do everything ourselves, on our government budget, right? There are some things we can do, and some things we're mandated to do. But, who are the appropriate folks to go into one of our, our little colonias down near the southern border with Mexico to encourage and talk in those mixed households where you have some documented and some undocumented folks, right? About, okay, who can get registered in this household and who can vote, and here's the information, and don't feel intimidated to come out to a polling place if you're from a mixed household, right? That sort of thing. So we do have to work together with, and our main role, we feel, is to provide just the accurate information about where, when, and how to cast a ballot. Of course, in addition to making that access to the polling place available. And then, we have to trust the partners that they are going to give out that correct and accurate information.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've seen that a partner has done where you've thought, wow, that's a really good way of reaching people? Whether, we work with so many organizations that are knocking on doors, that are sending text messages, that are doing community events. Is there anything that you think is particularly successful?
Well, really, at the end of the day, we all know it's a very low-tech solution, right? Having leaders from within community working with voters and citizens and people from within community in whatever way is meaningful to them. So in our 23 federally recognized tribal areas in the state, it is a huge tradition to have, food and celebration on election day. So there will always be sort of just like a little voting party with lots of food, outside a polling place, maybe during the early voting period too, to get folks interested and say, hey, you came to Chapter House to do your whatever business you had here. Here's some food. Oh, by the way, there's early voting over here. Have you early voted? Do you know how to do that? Do you want to do that while you're here today? Before you drive back out, 20 miles or 50 miles or whatever back to your home. So really, at the end of the day, whatever works in that community, whatever traditions are meaningful, integrating those with information and opportunities to vote.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's so much interplay. I really appreciated what you shared about none of us can do this alone. And I feel like there's so much interplay between the Secretary of States and local election officials, between the Secretary of State and lots of city councilors and state reps who have many different relationships. What are some ways that you like to work with local and state elected officials leading up to elections and to get the word out about, all of the important things that, the ways that they have reach in their communities, whether it's promoting early voting, or what are some of the ways that folks in this room can collaborate with their secretaries of state?
Well, again, as representatives from your communities and being trusted voices in your communities, making sure you have accurate information about where, when, and how to cast a ballot is paramount. And so if your Secretary of State is providing that information, or your chief election official, but also your local county election official is a tremendous resource. And what I've often found too, especially in our smaller jurisdictions, maybe you have a county election official that's not as out there because they're just very focused. They just want to do their job. Maybe they have like 2 people. I have counties with literally 2 people in the county clerk's office. Those are also the counties that have more cows than people living in them. But, so that's fair. But then you can go to maybe the county next door or the biggest county in the state or whatever and kind of see what they're doing and just copy, cut, and paste and use the information that's appropriate for your community.
Great. And so I think at this point, there's someone perhaps with a question.
Yeah. 2 microphones around the phone.
Great. So does anyone have any questions for our resident expert on, on elections administration?
Good morning. I'm Scott Holcomb from Atlanta, Georgia, and my good friend Elena, who's also from Atlanta, our eyes kind of rolled when you talked about food in the polls, because that's not allowed in our neck of the woods. Among the costs that you mentioned, I didn't hear legal fees. And one of the things that, especially for battleground states, that used to be a very, very rare thing of an election contest is no longer a rare thing. And I think those of us that are in states that are battleground states have to be prepared for that. And we have to have lawyers ready, we have to have strategy ready, and most of the claims will likely be without merit, just like this last cycle, but we still have to deal with it. And it's not just at the presidential level. On a pro bono basis, I defended a member of the Fulton County School Board, and the purported piece of evidence was a screenshot from a local news agency that showed the results being X, which were not from an official source, but they used that to file and say, how could this have been published? And then the outcome was different than what they wanted. But can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we should be prepared for what is inevitably coming of litigation? It's just going to be a part of what we do now in terms of elections.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I know exactly that example you're talking about. We had a similar situation in the general election last year. Well, Channel 4 is reporting this, but your site says this, so obviously you're wrong. I'm like, wait a minute. We're the official source, not them. That is true, not just in battleground states. It's true everywhere. In my state, I'm in federal court right now over whether or not organizations can publish your voter information online and just have it out there. Maine and my state are the two states kind of dealing with this issue. The number of public records requests has gone up drastically. In fact, public records requests are being weaponized against our offices, not just because these folks want accurate information, but because they know it's going to make our lives more difficult, where we don't necessarily have dedicated staff to spend all day, every single day, going through every single email I've ever sent to anybody for the last, 6 years I've been in my current office, things like that. So you're absolutely right. We should all be prepared for that. Estimating that is probably hard. You're the attorney, I'm not, but we need that expertise from our legislators to figure out what could we possibly be dealing with here going into 2024.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go to our friend in the back.
Hi, good morning. Natalie Amacker, and I'm a county commissioner in Teton County, Wyoming. And kind of following the last question that you all were discussing, I'm curious for any thoughts on when local election administrators are really trying to do things and increase access, but the Secretary of State is perhaps trying to work at odds with that.
So I think yes, I've been that county clerk back in the old days. And I think, the good news is that if for myself, thinking about myself back then, if I had a supportive county commission and I said, hey, I'm trying to do this program, maybe I want to pilot something here that's not happening in other parts of the state, but it's still legal, those types of things, I think definitely, if to the extent you can support your local election official. It's hard, though. There is that natural tension between the chief election official and the local election officials. That's just sort of the nature of the beast. But I think there are so many things that local election officials can just do of their own volition if they have that financial support, or go out for grants, right? I used to do that all the time as a county clerk, to do something that my county commission or the state legislature wouldn't fund me to do. It makes life harder. It's more difficult, but it can be done.
Yes, it can be done. So I think we need to end here. I so want to thank Secretary Toulouse Oliver for the really amazing conversation, and thank you to all of you for making democracy work in your local areas.
Yeah, thank you all so much.